Well, good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Eliza Muse, and I'll be the virtual room host for today's keynote, The Amazing Adolescent Brain, Opportunities and Vulnerabilities. Please let me remind you of a few items before our presenter and presentation gets started. Feel free to use the chat box throughout the session and keep yourself on mute while the presenter is speaking. As a reminder, a link to our conference agreements can be found in the chat box. At the end of the workshop session, the presenter will stay online afterwards for a Q&A. Also, please don't forget to fill out the evaluation at the end of the workshop session to get entered into our drawing for door prizes at the closing session of the day today. Again, I'm honored to be here today to introduce our fabulous speaker, Dr. Linda Chamberlain. And let me share with you her bio. Scientist, author, founder of the Alaska Family Violence Prevention Project, Dr. Linda Chamberlain has worked in the field of trauma for over 2 decades. Known for her abilities to translate science into practical strategies with diverse audiences, she is an internationally recognized keynote speaker who conveys a message of hope and empowerment. Her current focus is on a healing-centered framework with a strong emphasis on brain, mind, body practices to address how stress is stored in our bodies and our natural instinct to heal. Her skill-based presentations highlight simple tools that are appropriate for children, youth, and adults. So take it away, Dr. Linda Chamberlain.
Thank you. Hello, Alaska. I'm going to just share my screen, which will take a minute here. And I'm going to mention to everyone, if you could have a pen or pencil and a piece of paper available. We're going to use that a little bit later on to do a little quiz. I'm adapting how I like to do quizzes and adapting that a little bit to how we work with Zoom and being across the miles. So I love being, you're basically my buds. It's great to be with Alaskans. And I especially love talking about what is truly the amazing adolescent brain. So we're going to be covering some of those changes. They're really happening all over the adolescent brain, but we're going to focus on some very specific and important ones. And within that context, I'm also going to talk about stress, not just because of what we are all in the world are experiencing right now, but also because there is a unique vulnerability among the opportunities and also the fact that there are vulnerabilities. The adolescent brain, because of the changes happening, are more sensitive to stress. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. The fact that communicating with teens, like anybody didn't know this, but I mean, this is kind of the funny thing about science is sometimes it takes a while for science to catch up with cultures and people's way of knowing through parenting and living and having been an adolescent. But communication operates a little bit differently, and there are little things that we can do that help us to be able to communicate more effectively with teens. Risk-taking looks different to the adolescent brain, and there are actually neurophysiological reasons for that, developmental reasons for that. Then a bit around substance use, the adolescent brain, and some comments about sleep if we get there, which I think we will. But I do want to mention, because I am very oriented towards things that we can do, how we speak, not just from the brain to the body, but from the body to the brain. It's a brain body, it's all one, works together. Science likes to kind of separate them out, but it's a package deal. I use exercises throughout, and then the workshop is very much focused on that. Everything. Whenever I say we're going to do a practice right now, it's an invitation. So if you don't feel like it, if it doesn't sound right to you, observing is great. And, commenting, asking questions about it afterwards, just that everything is an invitation here. So neuroplasticity, very, hot term and has been for a while now. And what I just want to say about it is that during adolescence, this is play foam, and I think there's a lot of light reflection on it. But if you've ever been with me in a live presentation, play foam, and when I get to talk to teens, they make all kinds of very cool things out of this. They usually would pass it around the room. This represents the discovery of plastic in this way where it could be malleable and change shape in response to environment, the pressure I'm putting on it, and then keep changing. Well, that's like our brains. It's not just the adolescent brain, the aging brain can do that too. However, the amount of plasticity in the adolescent brain parallels what we see in early childhood. Neurodevelopmentally, it is a fantastically important window of opportunity and time of change. And early on in neuroplasticity, we did not understand, when we understood this, we didn't understand actually how plastic the adolescent brain is, how it is changing so much, how it is so responsive to experience and environment. And you can look at that as tremendous opportunity for building resilience. And of course, there is also risk in that too, particularly because of how the adolescent brain is drawn to new and novel experiences, which the brain loves in general, and even more so during adolescence. So we'll get more specific about that. But the reason I'm showing this picture, it was featured in the New York Times. That's how much of a surprise in 2008 when Jay Geed, National Institutes of Health, when they really got a handle. So again, we really haven't known this to the magnitude that we know now. And of course, we're learning more each day about how much this brain is changing. And what you're looking at here is that with these colors, yes, the cortex, tons of stuff, happening in the early years with that, color of all lit up with, the green and yellow and lots of, neurons being added and wiring going in and so forth. But actually that's continuing and has a burst during adolescence around the time of puberty, but also carrying on with this growth and then what we call pruning, synaptic pruning, all the way, into the 20s. That was very big news to understand that. And so it's a work in progress, and since a focus of the conversations that you've been having during this conference is how we encourage and grow brains, and especially during adolescence, to be lifelong learners. This brain is a learning ninja, like totally. The capacity of memory, nevertheless, muscle coordination, performance and such, the people can get frustrated because teens pick things up. Maybe I'm really into drumming for 4 or 5 months, and then my focus shifts, boom, and I'm really interested in a different instrument or a different activity. I'm going to really focus on my basketball right now. And so I step away from the drumming, and then it's the next thing. Well, I feel as caregivers, folks working with teens, the more that brain explores, the better it is. And something like drumming just being a great example. If I do that drumming for even a few months, when I'm 20, when I'm 30, and keep going on, when I listen to music, drumming or otherwise, more of my brain is going to light up. I'm going to use more of my brain to do that. My brain, my body is going to remember that rhythm. But the adolescent brain, it's an explorer. It wants to explore and be exposed to different things. And more of the problem is when that isn't encouraged, when that opportunity isn't there. So I know you know all this from being in the work you do with after-school programs, but we were talking in the beginning, and that wasn't something that was hugely available when I was that age. And I just think it's fantastically important from a neurodevelopmental perspective. So if we were together right now, I'd be passing around a grapefruit and a cabbage. And we'd be kind of thinking about it relative to the brain, because particularly the adolescent brain, interestingly, there's a lot of fruit and nuts that approximate structures in the brain. But if I were to ask you just, and with the slides, I can't see the chat room right now, but the thinking about the size of the brain by age 6. Probably most of you know, if you've had some early brain development, and maybe you're working with little kids as well in your after school programs, that puppy is going to be 90 to 95% of its adult size by age 6. And that's pretty interesting. And then it's going to maybe it feels like a contradiction to what we're talking about, like around adolescent brain development. So we'll explore that a little bit more. So if I were to ask you how much your brain weighs, or an adolescent brain, because I've just said that by age 6, it's already 95% of its adult size. Are you thinking that you would get a cabbage in weight or a grapefruit? And I'm always intrigued by how many people stand up if I ask them, if they think they're a cabbage, and, like half of the room goes up, and I'm like, well, you think a lot of your brain, right? But the amazing thing is, this is about a 3-pound cabbage. I had my husband weigh it at the grocery store, and that's what your brain weighs. Your head with the cranium, the bones and all that is, a lot more, but this is a lot to hold up. And in fact, I was always amazed in rotation in hospitals when babies were born, how they, the possibilities they were going to be able to hold that thing up. But this is the weight of your brain sitting right there right now, the adolescents you work with. If we talk about size, I got to set this thing down, it's heavy. If we talk about size, it's kind of more like a grapefruit. And I'm guessing that most of you know that if it comes to hemispheres, I'm cutting the grapefruit right now, ever so carefully on my desk near my computer. You get 2 hemispheres, right? And if you're ever with people and they're talking about, oh, I'm left-brained, I'm right-brained. If you're firing on all cylinders, you're both brained. These work together. One very important thing that is happening during adolescence is that what we refer to as the crosstalk, the wiring between the 2 hemispheres of the brain, is super going in. And this allows the brain to work more efficiently, to work together as a team. But until that is mature and fully happening, it's harder for teens, especially when there's a lot of changes going on, to integrate information. Like, you think just about sensory, right now. So I smell the grapefruit. I've got the texture of the grapefruit in my hand. It's dripping all over my desk, which I'm going to have to deal with. So I'm aware of that. Visually, I'm looking, at, the gallery of pictures and such. So visual input, all the different senses. Nevertheless, the fact, that every day you have 50 to 70,000 thoughts spinning around your brain. So the train is moving pretty fast in there. It's a lot to integrate and put together. And when a brain is changing, and when it doesn't have all the hardware yet, because this isn't even a software, this is a hardware issue. It's not an adult brain. The concept that when adults would think and even say things like, you're 15, you're 16, you should, they were thinking like a teen brain should think like an adult brain. And it's not a more mature little kid's brain, and it's not like an adult brain. It is unique in all that is happening. So the last thing I'm just going to say to you relative to this. So how could it be then, if the brain is 90 to 95% of its, adult size, like, the grapefruit, and those 2 hemispheres and such by age 6, that I'm going to emphasize all these major changes going on in that brain. Well, when does the cortex, the most advanced thinking intellectual area of the brain, mature? Is it 15? Is it 20? It's it's out to 25 now. We know it's 25. So and the thing about the cortex is, it's I've peeled a couple leaves of the cabbage, and cortex in Latin means bark, like the bark of a tree. So cortex is all over the brain. If it wasn't a bad hair day before, it's probably going to be now. I wanted to get a purple cabbage, but they didn't have any because it's my color. So I'll work with this. But here's the thing, it's covering my whole brain. It's not that thick. It's the thickness of a couple cabbage leaves. And this area is going through a major metamorphosis, like a butterfly. It is dramatically changing through the brain. This is the happening area of, decision making, advanced thinking, problem solving, weighing consequences of behavior, something that teens aren't necessarily, they're getting better at, but they are not, I think none of us would argue that they're not consistent at. So that is how you can have a brain that's nearly an adult size, and yet through this very thin but has the most neurons rich area of the brain, is going to be dramatically changing. And someday I hope to be in person with you, and we can take apart that grapefruit and cabbage more. I'm just gonna set this aside now and wipe up. So what's happening with the hardware here? Well, the gray matter, when we looked at that picture with all the colors and stuff, what we were seeing there with these, we got MRI, functional MRI. We've got all these ways. How did this learning happen? Was the advance in technology to be able to look inside of the brain, not just to look at it, but to actually, with functional MRI, see what's working, what's being used, what's growing, what's changing, and so forth. So that was huge. And that's really, and being able to do that without a lot of radiation and stuff, because you're looking at magnetic fields and such. And never forget, by the way, that we are made of energy, and we are energy moving around all the time. People, especially since I'm from Homer, you say energy, and people are like, whoa, woo woo. Well, guess what? You got a magnetic field in your heart. It extends beyond you. You have an MRI. We're measuring, the brain. We're looking at energy moving out through systems with the heart, the brain, the entire body. So that it was allowing us to look at this in a whole different way. And that cortex, it's going to be actually, thickening. Then there's going to be some pruning going on, because, the brain it's a use it or lose it. So just like when we talk about little kids and how important it is, what their environment, exposure and such is, well, because the adolescent brain is a learning ninja, that is true as well. They're going to strengthen the neural pathways, the connections, the synapses, the wiring in the brain in terms of what they use. And the more you use it and repeat experience, then the stronger those networks get. And the brain is also specializing in a very big way because of the hardware changes. So that's why I was saying things like how important, the brain needs movement. So sports, movement, they're like critical. One of the dilemmas right now, and especially right now, is we're not moving as much. And so thinking about, and I'm going to have you moving even as we talk in these next 45 minutes or so, because it affects your learning. It affects your ability to concentrate and everything else. The brain is getting its final layers of insulation. And if you think of like teens who are maybe in training, with electricity and stuff like that, why is there insulation around a wire? Because aside from protecting you from getting shocked, it becomes faster. You lose less energy. It's more efficient. And that's what myelin, this layer, this insulation, is doing around the wiring of the brain. It's getting faster, and it gets more effective for integration, for bringing all that information together. Like, I'm already late for, I was going to say late for school, but I know some schools aren't open right now, but I was supposed to be online for class. And I can't figure out where I put the assignment that I worked on. and I didn't eat my breakfast, and you told me to take the honey bucket or the garbage out, and I didn't do that. And this is for a brain that doesn't have all the wiring and insulation, the hardware in, this is easily overwhelmed and not going to be able to focus. As much as multitasking is a myth for any brain, but even more so for the adolescent brain. So when I was talking about that cortex, the part right up front here, way behind your forehead, this is the prefrontal or the frontal cortex. And when you think about changes happening in the adolescent brain, this is one of the last areas to mature. And so I think if you look at this list here of things that probably don't surprise anybody, but it's the stuff that will be finalized last in the brain. And if there's a history of hard times, and when I say that, I mean because I work in trauma a lot and stuff where there's been some real challenges growing up and maybe not, unpredictable environment for lots of different reasons, then you might be pushing that line out a little bit because the brain, you got to feel safe and secure to be in this area of the brain. And this is the area of the brain that impulse control, judgment, the problem solving, really getting, finding our language, finding our words, and being able to express emotions, which is, I think, a challenge in many aspects in modern culture. Planning stuff, setting goals. You're going to get better, but this is prefrontal cortex, and this area of the brain is not done. And there's a saying in adolescent brain development: if you have a mature prefrontal cortex, you need to hang out with one. And what I mean with that is us. What I mean with that is after school programs and opportunities to be with mature prefrontal cortexes, even though developmentally speaking, there is a natural pushback. You suck, I don't need you, stay away. And sometimes I think caregivers and parents feel that this is an appropriate time to be stepping back. They need, this is, modeling. They so need our mature prefrontal cortex with them to be able to be getting these skills, experiential learning, because until the prefrontal cortex, the forehead cabbage leaf is mature, it is harder to see options. If you're sometimes problem solving, brainstorming with an adolescent, and they are, you're seeing 3 options or maybe 5 options, and they come up with 2 that are like at opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's kind of like, say what? They understand that it can look irrational to us because they just, they're not there yet and having that bandwidth to be able to see that. And of course, a good decision making comes from experience. Not all teens are in an environment where they're getting to practice that or where it's safe for them to be practicing that. It is a brain that has to work harder until it gets all of its connections in that crosstalk between the hemispheres. And I didn't say this before, it's not just between the hemispheres, it's within the hemispheres. So it needs practice. It needs mature prefrontal cortexes. And the thing is I think it's obvious to everybody now how much stress kids in the world is experiencing. But I think sometimes people don't appreciate how teens are rating stress, and this is pre-COVID data, Pew Research Center, as and anxiety, depression as a leading problem among their friends. That the bullying and concerns about drugs are even coming as, and those are important. I'm not saying otherwise, but secondary in their perception, at least, to how what they're concerned about. So, why is that teen brain so sensitive to stress? Well, it's the structures that are involved in response to stress are going through major changes during this time. The hippocampus, that's our kind of memory maker in the brain. and the amygdala, which is always scanning for got a potential threat. I don't feel okay. You're dissing me. You're making me, I feel bad about myself, or just things that are not feeling okay. That's the amygdala, always scanning 24/7, making sure that I feel okay in my environment, because that's part of survival brain. And these areas are going through big changes during adolescence. And I'm happy to answer. I know this isn't a brain anatomy class, but I'm happy to answer any more questions about that, when we go into our question and answer. And the prefrontal cortex, we already said, and that's part of the system to override the smoke alarm, the more reactive amygdala. The amygdala, I'm just going to, we're going to come to this again, but this is the area of the brain is like Nike. Just do it, man. Just do it. Okay. It's not like the prefrontal cortex before you would just do it. If it gets the opportunity, if you can get past the stress, would be the part of the brain that says, well, if I do that, there's a good chance I'm going to lose my smartphone privileges for 30 days. And I don't really want that. So maybe that's not such a good idea. You've got to be upstairs in the brain to be doing that kind of thinking. And we use this with caregivers a lot. I actually have used it with teens. You can be the judge. But when we talk about stress, the dilemma is that stress pushes us downstairs in the brain. If you don't have good tools for self-regulation, for coping skills, for dealing with stress, very much what we'll be talking about in the workshop. And yeah, maybe those are things that you, maybe you have learned those from your caregivers, but sometimes not. We need to stay upstairs to be thinking about consequences of behavior, to be making good decisions, and to flat out learn. You got to be upstairs. The dilemma is that stress, unaddressed, too much, starts to push us downstairs. And frankly, it looks like an attention deficit diagnosis. And this is a dilemma in my world, because we can see a lot of times too much stress and situations of hard kids living with or dealing with hard times as looking like their attention deficit, because they're having trouble focusing. They're acting more impulsively, losing their temper more easily. They're having difficulty getting along with others. Well, guess where social connection happens? It doesn't happen in survival brain. In survival brain, you're on red alert. You're just trying to keep it together, be okay. You're on the defensive. Okay, you got to social connection is an upstairs brain activity. And when people get downstairs, or we see them going downstairs, we need to think about tools to help them walk back upstairs. You can't have a meaningful conversation with somebody when they're downstairs, but you can help them to be able to just down regulate and see what they need to feel okay. So I've emphasized a lot about the prefrontal cortex. I just want to be clear, because that cabbage leaf, again, is covering my entire brain. It's got a whole bunch of different areas. And there are changes happening throughout those areas. So this is going to make a couple comments. Well, particularly I was going to zero in on the occipital lobe is, just going through some very dramatic changes. And we look around that area of the brain and the visual cortex. It seems like we might have somebody who needs to mute themselves. I'll just mention, I don't know if others can hear
Hey,
that.
hi.
So the visual cortex.
Hello. Hi. Good. How are
Hi,
you?
can you mute
All
yourself,
right.
Aaron? Great, thank you. The visual cortex is down in the that back area of the brain, that kind of ball that you feel. I think it's interesting that relative to talking to teens about dreaming, often become very, very colorful, very visual dreams. I also think that my observation is that sometimes flashbacks about stuff seems to really surface during adolescence. Maybe it's because there is so many changes in this visual cortex area of the brain during that time. Just dramatic changes throughout. And then we have this area, and I seem to have pushed aside I'm just taking a look for a moment here. We have this highway of neural fibers in the brain that's called the corpus callosum that runs between the two hemispheres. That's where the big crosstalk is happening between the two hemispheres. We didn't understand that it's not just an information highway, but it's actually involved in creativity and higher thinking. And it's another area of the brain that isn't going to be done until the mid-20s. So cool thing is that it goes through a growth spurt during this time. And I was really happy to hear that because it seems very super sensitive to hard times during early childhood. It can be a little smaller because of that. And so you see like adolescence, again, it's like grasping the ring for opportunity. And the trauma world, I would say, if we missed them, when they were 5, 6, 7, whatever, and now we have this opportunity through, after school programs and such to be with them during adolescence, that this can be a time of incredible neurological repair as well. Cerebellum, just got to mention it because, this is like, if you're good at drumming, dancing, paddling, rowing, you've got a good cerebellum because that's the area that coordinates muscle movement, balance, but it also, again, has a role in higher thinking that we didn't realize. So if you're not moving much, if you're glued to your Zoom screen, like I am so many hours of the day, that, we just got to, think about moving. And I think I have a movement slide coming up. If not, I'll just pop one in without the slide, because 47 minutes of sitting and you're checking out, you could say, yeah, she's all right, and I'm interested. And still, there's going to be a degrading in your focus because the brain needs to move. And when it comes to stress, it is absolutely, critical to move. So like if I was a raven right now, just bring your arms, up. You could pick whatever bird you want. I have a lot of ravens around me because of all the dog yards. And so take a breath in here and exhale and move however you want. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, and arms down, and go at your own pace and just do a couple bird breaths here. Okay, so like you're flying, you can be whatever bird you want to be. And if your bird moves differently than this, go for it. I'm inhaling as my arms go up just because it opens the chest. And when I'm sitting, if I'm kind of rounding as I sit at my desk, or I'm thinking about something else and I'm stressed, I start restricting the diaphragm. That affects how I breathe. It increases the stress. One more time, if that's all right. Great. So you just oxygenated your brain. You had a little conversation with your diaphragm to open up the chest. We're seeing big problems with people because with stress, you round and it collapses the diaphragm, can't breathe as well. And that makes you more vulnerable to everything, stress, but also to the lungs not moving stuff around. That's a whole nother topic, which I'm going to be doing for a school conference in January online. So I'm looking forward to seeing how interested folks are in that stuff. But for now, what do teen brains need? The skill-based kind of stuff you're doing with them is absolutely critical. You look at the best academic performance in the world, and it's going to be Finland. And I had a project there, was almost 2 years long, and the schools, it's entirely learning by doing. It is just phenomenal. It just turned me on my head in terms of how I think about learning and such now, even though granted I'm using a PowerPoint presentation. This brain needs new experiences, novel experiences. And the big thing I want to say here is just I retired from dog mushing this past year, and I'm going to miss it hugely this winter. However, one of the most important lessons I got from it was around swing dogs. and rotating every position of the team from wheel to the very front to the swing dogs into lead, but creating that leadership opportunity by putting them in swing right behind lead at first, because they were learning how to make decisions, learning how to take commands, but it was kind of a safe leadership setting as a swing dog to be able to do that. I have done a lot around, leadership and lessons from the trail around this. And it's because I realized I wasn't giving my wheel dogs leadership opportunities to just come up into that position, but without the full on pressure of lead dog to be able to uh, be at the front and be able to make mistakes and not have it be catastrophic, which granted would be a big tangle or going off the trail and so forth. Although I've definitely had bigger messes than that. But it was the perfect thing. What are the swing dog opportunities in your activities with teams to be able to take be in that leadership training role, but with the context of some other mature core texts around them to lead the team? Just going to do a couple of things here now, if that's okay, to just for breath and movement. I knew we were getting to it, kind of watching the time here, but I think we got time to do both of these. I'm going to bring my screen down a tad just for a moment. If you feel like doing this, remember everything is an invitation. And this is a good one for stress. Let's say I was sitting here listening to me and it's stressing me for some reason. And that when I'm stressed, that's going to change my breath. We have become a nation of chest breathers. Indigenous populations have known and taught from infancy the importance of breathing through the nose. So I'm going to ask you to follow the wisdom of indigenous populations and try to breathe through your nose as you bring your hands together. So the knuckles are knuckle to knuckle. I'm raising my shoulders so that you can see my hands, but I'm going to ask you to then drop your shoulders because that's what we do when we're stressed. Now on an inhale, just press knuckle to knuckle and let it go on the exhale. And just do this a couple of times. This is actually opening up the structure for breathing. And one more breath. And even if your nose is stuffy, see if you can do it through your nose, if it feels okay. There's just a lot of ways that we can work with the breath without even being too focused on the breath to do so. And I mentioned here because I want to talk about some tools as we go through this. And learning to breathe, when I lived in Anchorage, was being used by juvie services up there. And when I talk about, I'm a cherry picker. I look at different tools like social emotional learning, like learning to breathe, L2B, just Google it or search engine it. And you'll see they've done a book. It's not about everybody's in the position to buy a new program and implement the whole thing. But I saw how it was helping teens who were under tremendous stress because they were dealing with our juvie justice. They were in the juvie justice system. And they had some great activities. So I bought the book and I found the activities were really useful for myself. But things like my mind is a cast of characters and emotional charades and surfing the waves. Check out their website. Check out their book, maybe even have a conversation, but just see is there something to cherry pick as an activity. And within it, they have a lot of breath work and mindfulness, because none of this helps if you can't help that teen get upstairs in their brain. Self-calming tools. You got to calm the brain, relax the muscles, help them to focus. We don't have to use the word mindful, although every culture seems to have a term for it. And one of the things is maybe to look, at what that word is in your culture and world. I'm just going to ask everybody to raise their arms up like this for a moment, because just doing this, I'm not going to even tell you how to breathe, because raising your arms up like this changes how you breathe. When you do this, this is called a power pose, but I don't like the word power so much. I think empowering pose. You might want to take a look at the TED Talk by Amy Cuddy that comes out of Harvard, actually, but it's pretty cool because you just gave yourself a little oxytocin. We're across, the lines, the internet and such, and yet oxytocin is a neurotransmitter, a hormone for social connection. What if we just did, as we're talking to a teen, we're with a teen, looking at how we move in an empowering pose and getting a little bit of oxytocin along with it, because I know actually that we are able to do that even across the internet. So all of this to say, why am I asking to do these things? Not just to keep you with us together right now, but because movement is a brain booster. This is science. When people are cutting programs, whether it's after school, gym, movement and stuff, crazy bad idea, because developmentally it's crucial for the adolescent brain. The brain clearly does better when throughout childhood and adolescent, when it has movement. We're actually getting oxytocin. We're also getting serotonin, which people know a lot of because of all the drugs that can do that, but they have a lot of consequences attached to them. How about if we can do this with movement? And we can. So Spark is a really great book if you need the science to argue for funding, to say how important this is. And they give some great examples. I think I'll do that at the end because I want to make sure I get through this content here. I just want you to look at this picture right now and ask yourself what emotion you see. Is it surprise? Is it fear? What's really interesting is that this was a very pivotal study that has been replicated many times in different ways with adolescents and teens, adolescents and adults, looking at this picture and a number of other pictures too, but this one was very important because I am guessing that a lot of you are thinking maybe shock, surprise, fear. However, teens, a very significant, almost half when you went into like the 13, 14, year old category, saw something that teens often see when we would think as an adult that it's not there. Anger. It turns out, and why would that be? Well, it turns out this isn't a composite of what was seen while they were looking at these pictures. Their brains were being looked at with functional MRI, different types of scans. And then this is kind of a composite of the difference between the adult and the adolescent brain reading emotions. And what they were seeing was that the adolescent brain is still working more out of the lower limbic downstairs, we'll just call it the downstairs survival area of the brain, the area of the brain that's always, checking out the environment, got to make sure everything's okay. Is there, anything that doesn't feel okay to me, potential threat? And the more reactive, impulsive area of the brain, which just so happens to mature way before the cabbage leaf, the prefrontal cortex. And adults, when you work more out of that area of the brain, you are not as good at interpreting emotions, and you are more likely to read danger and potentially anger when you're relying more on that area of the brain. They're getting better and better and moving more and more upstairs where we see in the adolescent brain, but they are so not there yet. And so that leads to kind of a lag in, relative to communication and reading information. They process more quickly, and that downstairs amygdala area, it's going to be a brain that reacts more quickly without weighing all the information, more likely to see anger when it isn't intended, and it's using less of the upstairs brain. And with practice, it's going to get faster. It's going to get more efficient. But what I would say to you is, if you've ever known, maybe a 10-year-old or so, and you were really, you could read one another, you were really in sync with one another, you understood one another. And then around 12, 13-ish, kind of depends. But while puberty is sliding around, the brain development seems as more steady in its timing, because it's not just driven by hormones. At any rate, this same kid is looking at you like you're a freaking alien, okay? Or they are totally misreading your information, what your intention was when you were communicating. Well, they actually are going to lose some tread. They're going to get a little slower and a little less efficient, because there's so many changes going down there during this time. And the thing about adolescents is that they're phenomenal at handling this change. I think if you put that level of change going on to your average fixed adult brain, we'd be suffering in a way that many of us would not handle it well. So it's just, it's a time of cutting some slack and understanding, because when we don't express anger constructively with an adolescent brain, there are a number of things that can happen, unfortunately. And when we do express anger, it doesn't focus them on the behavior that needs to be changed. It focuses them on being PO'd at us, right? It's just why law enforcement uses what we call triangulation, ideally, when they have that training, because you want them, it's just like, here's your ticket. You need to slow down before you hurt somebody. I'm mad at them. I'm not thinking about the fact that actually I probably maybe was driving a little too fast. It's icy today. I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to hurt someone else. When you can have a different conversation that doesn't go in that entry, and you have to be super aware, because we will push them more downstairs. Somebody who's already tendency to be more downstairs in the brain, if we approach with anger, or maybe even a facial expression that we're not aware of that is angry, the probability that we push them further down into limbic is highly probable. And here's another probability, that we go limbic with them, because honestly, nothing's more, maybe I would say that dysregulation could parallel COVID in terms of its contagion factor. It is fantastically. You know how it is. One kid goes, and the next, and the next. And we adults are not impervious to, we are not resistant to going with them. And it weakens our relationship with them in a way that they are probably not going to come to us with the next problem that they have. So it's just, we need to help teens, I'm going to suspect most of you are familiar with the hand model for the adolescent brain. This is the cortex, and the thumb, is that, limbic region, and then the fingers come over as the cortex. And what we don't want to do is do things that make them flip their lid. They just, how do we help them stay upstairs? So, and the reason I'm mentioning something that I think you're very familiar with, and this is coming up in some other work I'm doing, where legal interviewing, forensic interviewing, we have a tendency to ask people, and especially teens. I do remember my father asking this many times, "What were you thinking?" And his point is that he thought I wasn't thinking, okay? But he wanted, that question kind of comes from, you need to think like I think. Well, wait, teens don't think like we think. They what they're working with is quite different. And when they're under stress, when anybody's under stress, you're going to get a lot further by asking somebody, what were you feeling? When they, and you need, timing is everything. So you got to give them time to move from stress, from limbic, to get back upstairs, maybe give a couple tools to do so. But then the real thing that you need to know and they need to know is, what were they feeling at that point when they made that decision? Because that, and that's going to be able to be where they can speak from as well. So just some things around, communication, that it's a lot, because they're so likely, especially under stress, so likely under stress to misread what we might be communicating in a situation where there is something difficult we need to talk about, where we are upset because of something they did. You need to tell them how you feel. Don't guess it, because we could be doing things. I can't believe you went past curfew. I was wondering where you were. Remember when your brother did that? Your grandmother's really, all this stuff starts to come out. And clearly, I'm in your face, even online right now. And we don't realize that. So being aware and then saying, I'm feeling really, really upset, anxious. The more specific you can get, I was so worried. And the reason I'm feeling worried is because you promised to text at 2:00. And then I didn't hear from you, and I heard that there was a problem, or, whatever it is. And I didn't know what to do. I had this meeting I needed to do on Zoom, and I was waiting for your text. Just say it fully out. I heard someone was hurt down at the river, etc. I'm gonna just some watching time here, and we've done some other movements, so I'm gonna work those into the workshop. So the most consistent changes during adolescence across culture: novelty seeking, focus on peer relationships, increased risk taking. I want to make sure we get through this risk taking part. This is the brain that is built to look for new experiences, developmentally necessary for that brain. And when we are annoyed at how much time they want to be communicating with their peers and not us, understand that this is part of maturation, of them finding their herd. And it's an important part of adolescence, that not for us to push away, but to understand that developmentally why this is happening. The risk taking, it is something that, therefore, because they're seeking novel experiences, is happening with the adolescent brain. And if there are emotions involved in it, then it increases the level of risk taking. So it, again, is why it's so important to think about, if they're stressed, how we're communicating, what we're talking to them about, because there's a tug of war going on in that brain between the limbic, the lower brain, the thumb on the hand model, just do it, and that let's think it through prefrontal cortex. The limbic maturing first, the prefrontal cortex maturing later. This is a brain that is very responsive to peers. It's very, so peer pressure. If you give me a ride home, from the rec room, I'm not, and because I'm in the car, you're not going to drive faster. But the reason laws are passed in different states around how many adolescents can be in a vehicle with an adolescent driver are because this is a brain that reacts more to peer pressure, and the gas pedal is going to go down. It translates into very interesting, measurable stuff. And then if you threw some emotions in there, because maybe I got into an argument with my girlfriend right before I got in the car, or I got a text that really ticked me off, then even more reactive, because these are things that the mature prefrontal cortex overrides. And when there's less of the communication, the crosstalk between the brain and such, then it's harder. I want to be really clear, whatever word we use for focus, mindfulness, the kind of, tools where we can, think about our breath, think about how we feel physically inside, just focus on anything for 1 minute is going to bring the thinking area of the brain more online and suppress the lower area of the brain. Very important, tools. So and these tools, when they aren't there relative to self-regulation, are critical because they increase the risk. We talk about self-regulation, the ability to, override the limbic area, to kind of think through and understand that emotion that's happening and such. If we don't have skills that help us to do that, it makes us at higher risk for substance use, for risk-taking, behavior sexually and otherwise, stuff that can get us into trouble. So one thing I very much wanted to talk about, and I'm seeing I've just got a few minutes left here. Obviously, I could chatter for quite a while, but I want to get to your questions and answers. I was just reviewing, I do evidence reviews of best practices, and SMART was one that I just looked at. And I know that after school programs are really smart about what environment looks like. And maybe that can't be together right now. So it's talking to teens and situations at home. But in an ideal situation, when we're together and we can create environments, we want environments that allow a lot of sensory exploration. And so that is having like exercise mats on the floor, different kinds of seats that I have two chairs next to me that allow me to move while I sit. I'm not going to do that in Zoom because it might drive you a little crazy watching that, but it's important, having a ball to sit on, having those crash pillows, having maybe some flooring surface that isn't hard to hit, having movable lighting, having sensory boxes that have tactile or, oral stuff in it that maybe, isn't too, sugary, but like licorice or something. Chewing is very calming. Humming is very calming. There are just, simple things that we do. There's a reason for having, ankle weights, a weighted blanket if I go to the, cozy corner, or a weighted vest. And if I don't have that kind of stuff, I just have bags filled with beans and rice and use those. It's just, really looking at your environment. And maybe if you're working with teens long distance right now, that they have some of those things that you use through an activity and exercise, because pressure and such are key. All right. Can I take about 3 more minutes or so just to talk about, okay, this is an area, this will be the last slide I do, and I wanted you to think about this. That's why I asked you to have a pen or pencil, but a good place to stop. The adolescent brain, because of the changes it's going through, responds differently to substance use. The state is putting out, of Alaska is putting in with Eliza and her colleagues, and probably after school programs and partnership, the Children's Trust are doing beautiful work around this. And it is so important to understand that this brain reacts differently. So if I'm to ask you, at the same blood alcohol level, are adolescents more likely to show the effects of intoxication on their muscle coordination? So I'm talking about like stumbling around. I'm talking about like looking drunk. Basically, are they more likely or less likely than an adult to show those signs? I think it's a really interesting question because they haven't maybe had decades of experience, exposure to alcohol. What do you think? The answer to this question, when I'm doing it live, I like to, do, T for true, and we do X for false. So this question is actually a T. Sorry, oops, said that backwards. It's false. And I think a lot of times when I do that, we get a lot of T's. They are less likely to show this. And it's a lot of people, think that's counterintuitive. And it's because again, the changes that are happening in this brain. And I'm not saying that they don't get to that point, but it actually takes their body longer to show the effects of sleepiness to alcohol. These are mechanisms that let us know that we've had enough and maybe not have more. The warning signs of too much and that I'm being impaired take longer to get to this brain. And that makes them more vulnerable to alcohol poisoning, as you know. It allows them to consume more, use other substances, and so forth. And it's counterintuitive. The next one is, are they more likely at the same level to black out or to pass out? Do you think for the same alcohol levels that they're more likely to black out? And let's just check in. Blackout means, hey, you know what? I'm still up and about doing stuff. I'm not going to have any memory of doing those things in blackout, but I'm still about and around. And passing out, of course, is that I'm not in my conscious move around state any longer. Interestingly enough, adolescents are more likely to go into the blackout than the pass out. And that is a challenge, again, because they can they can have no recollection. I've looked at forensic legal interviewing where there's the thought that it's impossible that someone wouldn't remember when they were still looking alert, actually looking okay. People may not recognize that they're in blackout and they were sexually assaulted multiple times, and challenging that would be possible. Well, guess what? It's possible. And unfortunately, it's another thing we need to understand about the vulnerability of this brain. Last two, I'll do quickly and stop. Everybody knows the answer here to this. Yeah. The earlier we start exposure, understand my point here for this will just be that we know that the earlier we have exposure, the more likely we have the dependency. Remember, this is a learning ninja brain, so it's learning an addictive pattern, and not that it can't be unlearned. But when you put off exposure 6 months, 12 months to a brain that is exploding with change and is extra vulnerable because of these changes, that's huge. You've bought a lot of time. It's really important. And last point here is that we did not know this until fairly recently, as we learn more about the neurotoxicity of marijuana and THC. It's going to affect an adult brain differently than an adolescent brain. Key factor is the younger the age of exposure, the more potential change that we can see to a brain that is consistently using. And interestingly enough, that some of the same areas affected by alcohol are also affected by marijuana. So lots of good information coming out about that. And thank you for letting me go a few minutes over there. I'm going to stop sharing now, and hoping this information is useful to you, and look forward to your questions now.
Thanks so much, Linda. There is a lot of great engagement in the chat box, lots of sharing for different brain body exercises, lots of reaffirming statements. Folks really like the swing dog analogy. So I think just starting from the top, I'll just pull some of the questions. In regards to the development, maybe of the prefrontal cortex, are there differences, male or female differences in the development time frame of the brain during adolescence?
That's a great question. A very controversial area that continues in brain development. We see some structural changes that occur relative to gender, where the amygdala seems to go through a bigger growth spurt during adolescence for males, and then for females, the hippocampus. I mentioned that's the memory maker. And you know how they say, like, girls never forget what you say, and they're always bringing it back up and stuff like that. Science argues over to the truth of this, because then there's a leveling out. However, overall, relative to maturity, there is a wee bit of a leg up on the female brain, interestingly, so that you may see a little bit, before 25, that and people discuss like maybe 12 to 18 months. It's a controversial topic in adolescent brain development about the gender differences, and ultimately saying that they very much then level out together. But some will say that the female brain is maturing a little bit faster than the male brain. And so you might be pushing that out to, like 26 and so. But I think the more important thing is around resilience and protective factors and the level of stress, because there's where you can really be pushing out and stalling the maturity. And don't ever think that it can't get there. Our brains can change till the day we die. And so we need to get unstuck on age and meet them neurodevelopmentally where they're at. And we can see some big differences relative to that. Great question.
Yeah. So I think you might have answered this second question, kind of was maybe more of a statement, but kind of those stages of prefrontal cortex development might it lead to more rigid thinking in adulthood. But I think you might have hit on that, on like the neuroplasticity even of the developing adult or the adult brain as well. But.
Yeah, and so here's what I would, remember. And I think we've talked a lot about early brain development, and especially if there are hard times and such, and sometimes ways that we might think that then this brain can't change, it's stuck. And the more we learn, the more we know that's not true. And that's true for an adolescent brain that you may feel is really having a hard time too. The very things that the adolescent brain needs to be able to reach its maximum capacity could be me at 35, because I haven't learned good self-regulatory skills. I had a pretty hard time during my adolescence and my social emotional. I got stuck in my social emotional development. I need that, I need those opportunities to be able to practice that. I need to understand how how things feel in my body, because I've probably walled that off. I need to I need to be moving. I need to be learning new things. I need to be doing them by repetition to set new grooves in the brain. And I need to totally not be exposing my brain to substances, because unfortunately it slows the learning and the capacity to add new neurons and synapses.
Great. With one of those brain body exercises, I think you mentioned a TED Talk. One question was about what was the TED Talk you're referencing with the empowered breathing?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I know I was flipping through some things quickly, and I may not have that in the information I gave you. It's Amy Cuddy, Cuddy. And just a lovely message. Amy Cuddy, and it's out of Harvard, and it's a TED Talk. If anybody has trouble, just if you Google that, and if you, search engine power poses, it should come up as well. Yeah, TED Talk Harvard. Somebody just put it up there. There may not. I'm not sure if it's Cuddy or they put Cuddey. Any problems? Just drop me an email. But I think you've got it there. And I'll tell you, she has a poster of that will come up if you search her name, of different, I'm going to say empowering poses, but power poses. And just to think about how, when we're communicating with teens, because certain poses are communicating disinterest, not be, kind of cutting ourselves off, as opposed to being more open to what somebody has to say, things that we do unconsciously. It's very helpful information, and it can also help teens, because I just see a lot of this. Teens are going to have a lot of neck issues. They already are. So I'm not expressing a theory. Adults already are, but it'll take longer for them to realize it, from looking down, caving the chest in, and then you get stress doing that too. So these poses open up. They're important.
Great. So there's a lot of engagement around that picture with the angry face. So it was interpreted as the angry face, and a kind of a statement, but also a question: misinterpretation of tone, emotion, and other communication methods, such as text message. Is a neutral text likely to sound angry? Is there any research on tone through other methods of communication?
Wow, I don't know the answer to that question. And I love when I get a question. I mean, maybe I should be embarrassed that I don't know, but for me, it's opportunity, because I need to look into this. I think that what I do know is that so I'll see what I can find, but when you take so many other factors of communication out, yes, that can be misinterpreted. But clearly we've seen that with emails. So I'm thinking, why, how we misread, we don't have tone, we don't have all this information to that ultimately can be little clues to help us understand. And then if you are not working with that a lot because you're communicating primarily through texts and such, how are your skills yourself? And you're going to have less practice in interpreting and conveying yourself. That is clearly, coming out in the social dilemma of communicate. I think that's the name of a film documentary right now about how we communicate. You have less opportunity to develop those skills. I'll see if there's any research specific to that around texts.
So a question here about how much and in what way would you encourage supportive adults to talk to adolescents about their brain development?
Oh, yeah. It's such an opportunity. I think first, if I'm just going to say, if after school programs can be, and I know from the response about the brain hand that they are conveying this information to teens, because I think a lot of parents don't have this information. So, simple tools for them to understand, so that if teens can be the conveyors of the information, that like so works. So have the caregivers to be open to that conversation, asking them if they've learned, anything about this, having, there's some pretty cool resources, like the University of Utah has this great website on how different drugs, for example, work with affect the brain. It's through their genetics branch, and it's super interactive. It's called Mouse Party, if you want to Google it. Well, that would be a really interesting thing to do, and it's totally scientific. It's not any shame, blame, don't do this. It's just about facts about the brain and exposure, and looking at Mouse Party, talking. I just think having, any kind of, information that around about this, that you can create a conversation. Do you know what your amygdala does? I'll just mention, this is an odd thing. I've been working with the court system in Washington State. And it was the courts that were working with families and younger kids. So I took my puppets to teach them about the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus would be key things to just have a conversation around. And then I was brought to Eastern Washington, and it was the youth courts. And I was trying to decide whether to bring the puppets or not. And because I know I don't want to minimize how smart the adolescent brain is and stuff. And before I started that day, somebody came up to me. They'd been out at the Seattle event, and they said, "Now you got your puppets, right?" Because I was using those with the teens. So there were people working with teens on that other event. And I'm like, whoa, I'm so glad I brought the puppets, because she said, yeah, they got a real kick out of it, and they were doing so. How to have a creative conversation around this, and maybe they're the conduit to other kids in the household about. You just got to make it fun, if you can get the cabbage, or just get other ways to make it visual and tactile. That's what I'm thinking. I think you got to make it relevant to the adult brain, though, or maybe they're not so interested about how all our brains can change. And then it's just some special things to think about with the teen brain.
Great. Yeah. So lots of great questions in here. I'll kind of skip around now to try to stay on the themes. Thomas asked a question about kind of elementary school age children. Will they understand it? Is it, you were talking about teens, but what about that younger age?
Okay, so here's the thing. I saw a message that I think somebody met my puppets at one point. Guess who taught me how to use puppets, and about how I went into, this is Finland. This is the Finland, I call it the Finland factor in my life. I go into a preschool, and there's 29 drawings of the amygdala. I have to spell check every time I write amygdala, because I never can remember where the Y and the G go. It's a weird word, right? And they have drawn their amygdala all around the room. And these 4-year-olds are describing to me what the amygdala does. And then they show me with the puppets. I didn't invent the puppets, the kids did. And they taught me how to use the puppets. So they so get it. And yes, they absolutely can. And then the thing is they're going home. They had these great stories because then they went home and one parent was upset because the older brother didn't do their chores. And the preschooler starts talking to the parent who was obviously, they were starting to get more upset and talking about brain development, and they all talked about it. They talked about, the amygdala, which is the dog, by the way. Dad, I think your dog is starting to bark. Went into this whole conversation. We have to make it fun. We have to do it when we're not, it was a moment under stress, but be able to do these things when we're not under stress so that they come to us when we are under stress.
Wow. So a couple questions about excessive drinking. So, relative to maybe other countries in Europe or versus excessive, is there a different sort of parallel to brain development based upon a person's consumption levels, or, excessive versus, daily use versus maybe once a month or ever use, and brain development?
So I am not sure I entirely understand the question. I mean, I've definitely worked in, obviously we have a pretty big issue here in Alaska, but I used to work in Siberia, and there are cultures and settings that, and then relative to cultural values that have higher exposure than we do. Finland, for all its wonderful opportunities, has anywhere in the Arctic has higher exposure and consumption. It's just a fact. But is the question about research looking at different doses? And they tend, in looking at damage, as you know, Eliza, to look at, often patterns of heavy drinking or multiple occasions of heavy drinking, 5 or more, drinks several times in a month, perhaps in different studies look at it in different ways. But when I look at it, it's like, wow, it's not as much as I thought they were talking about. I thought it would be more like that, that you were drinking every week or every other day, which unfortunately during my adolescence was a common occurrence where I grew up.
Yeah, well, why don't I read you the question, but I think you might have answered it. But so drinking to inebriation is what contributes to future addiction, not just a sip taste, i.e. the European practice of, of wine with a meal, and they correct?
Yeah, it's so distinguishing between that, tradition of maybe having a little, wine with dinner in France or something. But let's not forget that these countries that have, Italy be another good example too. They actually are pretty challenged by addiction as well. So it's complicated. And I'm not saying that that's, we're talking about a different exposure. That we're talking about more exposure than, having a taste, with the family at dinner and such. But it's a tough issue because we're talking about, we used to, you would be shocked how recently it was that we put alcohol in cough syrup for children. That was a huge fight to get it out of there. And it's not a ton, right? I mean, you're talking about a teaspoon, a tablespoon, not a good idea. It's a neurotoxin, and it's it's a brain that's just exploding with change. So I appreciate that those changes are made, and I think just have to think carefully about what's culturally appropriate and weigh it. And that's going to be different, for different parts of our state, country, and world.
Great. Thank you so much. That was just such a great answer. One more question about research related to gaming. And so sorry, let me just try to find it again. It's a great question. Are there any studies regarding an adolescent's brain development with the use of gaming, social media, and without? any similarities, differences, impact on relationship development. And I think this will be our last question
Yeah.
before we move on to the evaluation.
Sure. There are studies. I'm hoping I get this, understand this correctly. There are studies looking at, how brains are changing with exposure to a lot of video game. When you say gaming, being like video games and and such, right? Online, those types of activities. Obviously, there's a big issue and question around addiction, and it's going to be like talking about dose. I saw someone's post just saying they grew up in Europe and it was common to have half glass or taste with growing up and stuff, and obviously that is fine for many people, and for kids growing up with video games, many play, but it's about balance and moderation. And interestingly enough, you look at research showing that there are skills that come with that in terms of reaction time, peripheral, being able to see more things coming in peripherally, that they actually have an improved skill with video game playing. But you go to the edge, you start continuing down the continuum of too much, where you are dominantly spending your time that way, and then we see problems. So I think it's not actually different than the question before. It's about where is safe balance. The exposure and learning opportunities with videos, gaining a set of skills unparalleled in terms of hand-eye coordination, and such. And then we see kids are having trigger finger problems, for heaven's sakes, because they're playing so much. So there is some folks, there are even books now, looking around the research with this, and it's like a seesaw. They can gain this skill, but when too much, so much, then they're missing out. Anything you do out of balance is going to take from something else developmentally. Hope that's responsive enough.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, there was a question about a curriculum, but Felicia gave a great shameless plug for her networking session this afternoon on substance misuse curriculum and adolescent brain development. So that's great. And well, boy, just everybody, please join me in thanking Dr. Linda Chamberlain for this great presentation and workshop. I'm going to use my reactions here. So please make sure to fill out your evaluation form for this workshop. I think Thomas plugged that in there in the chat box, but there's also a evaluation form on the landing page for this virtual session, so you can get entered into the drawing for the door prize at the final session of the day today. And this workshop has concluded. However, if you'd like to stay, I think we're done because we've gone through our Q&A here. We've got probably 6 more minutes, right, of the break. Maybe I'll just pass it over to Thomas, but thank you everybody for all of the great work that you do. And thanks to the After School Network. And thank you, Dr. Linda Chamberlain. Great presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you. See some of you soon.
Everyone, get up and move for the next 6 minutes before we start our next sessions. Get your brain activated.